Phillip. So in this video, we're going to talk about a couple of the poems of Hildegard of Bingen, whose work I'm reading in the Norton Anthology of World Literature. Hildegard is a really, really interesting figure. She was a nun who lived from 1098 to 1179. She was an extremely prolific writer of different types of texts, not only poetry, but plays and theological treatises, mysticism, etc., etc. I actually performed in some of Hildegard's plays as an undergrad. The two poems of hers that are reprinted in the Norton are both addressed to or about the Virgin Mary. So we have responsory for the Virgin and responsory for the Virgin. Not necessarily the most clever or original titles, but these are both poems that are very, very interesting in the way that they treat their subject matter, the subject matter being the Virgin Mary. So the first one goes like this. Slender branch from the stump of Jesse, God gazed at you like an eagle staring into the sun, daughter of Zion, such daring. The supernal Father saw maiden's splendor, and her mortal flesh spoke his word. In the depths of mystery her mind was illuminated, and bright was the rose that sprang from that maiden, when the supernal Father saw her virgin splendor, and her mortal flesh spoke his word. Glorify the Father, the Spirit, and the Son, as it was in the beginning, so it is now, and so be it ever. The supernal Father saw a maiden's splendor, and her mortal flesh spoke his word. So stylistically, it's an interesting poem because we have these repetitions, we have these evocations of biblical passages, etc., etc. But this, to me, this is Zeus. This is not Yahweh necessarily. This is not the biblical God. This is the gods of Greek mythology. This is Zeus and Leda, or Zeus and Semele. This is Poseidon raping Medusa, whatever it is. This idea, and even the idea, God gazed at you like an eagle staring into the sun. Zeus raped Leda in the form of a swan. So this idea of like these bird comparisons and the visceral descriptions almost of impregnating Mary, divinely impregnating Mary, seems to me much more in the Greco-Roman tradition than in the Judeo-Christian tradition. I mean, the focus on her physical body is really, really interesting. And actually, there's in the second poem, there's more focus on her physical body, actually. But this idea of her as the rose, things like this. The rose is a very common symbol for Mary, so that's not necessarily that unusual. But the idea of like metamorphosis or transformation being associated with sexuality, and particularly sex with the gods, again, that's very, very Greco-Roman. Ovid's Metamorphosis is full of these kinds of stories. So it's an interesting take because while it is fitting, it does fit with the idea of what happens in the Bible where God impregnates Mary with Jesus and she's a virgin, etc., etc. This is not a chaste take on this story. This is, I mean, these two poems like, they're almost pornographic in a way, in the, like, it's erotica in a way. Like, I don't think Hildegard is like writing these things and being like, oh, this is so sexy, I'm turned on by this, or whatever it is. But again, like, this is very, very physical, very, very visceral, and it is about the act of being, the act of impregnating a god, impregnating a virgin. It's Greco-Roman. It's Zeus, Apollo, Poseidon. Yeah. So the second poem, again, I think this is even more focused on Mary's physical body, which is really an interesting thing, because in the Christian tradition, you tend to think of Mary as very chaste and very modest. And so the focus on her physical body is really a bit of a deviation from that tradition. So this is the second one. Even though it's still focused on her virginity, it's still focused on her physical body. So the poem goes like this. Priceless integrity, her virgin gate opened to none, but the Holy One flooded her with warmth until a flower sprang in her womb, and the Son of God came forth from her secret chamber like the dawn. Sweet as the buds of spring, her Son opened paradise from the cloister of her womb, and the Son of God came forth from her secret chamber like the dawn. Her virgin gate, that would be the hymen, which is not a real thing, by the way. You can look that up. But it's this symbol of virginity. The Holy One flooded her with warmth. The Son of God came forth from her secret chamber. Her Son opened paradise from the cloister of her womb. Seriously, what the fuck is this? I mean, this is X-rated shit here. I mean, this is a 12-line poem, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 6 fairly distinct and unambiguous, or maybe semi-ambiguous at best, references to the Virgin Mary's vagina. Too many references. Take it down a notch. This is the chaste virgin, the holy mother of Jesus. Let's take the focus off the vag. That's all I'm saying. No, I don't really care, actually. I think it's a fascinating poem because, again, it is so much different from the sort of chaste, modest image that, like, if you look at medieval paintings of the Virgin Mary and Renaissance paintings of the Virgin Mary, like, she's often very much, I mean, some of the Renaissance ones, she's like dressed in Renaissance clothes with her breasts basically out because they, Renaissance tops for aristocratic women came to about here, and then there was some gauze, but set those aside. Like, medieval and Renaissance depictions of Mary, she's very often chaste. She's very often fully covered, no hint of sexuality, really. This is a completely different take on the Virgin Mary. And one of the reasons that's so fascinating is because she is a figure who ultimately is remembered for her sexuality, for her reproductive capacity. And unfortunately, for so much of history, that's been what women are primarily associated with. And so that's actually a huge problem. But Hildegard, at least in my reading of it, is not critiquing sexuality in this sense, even though there's a very good chance that she herself was a virgin. She was a nun, and I think she spent pretty much her entire life as a nun from like early, because she started having ecstatic divine visions very, very early in childhood. I think she became a nun very early in her life, comparatively. But she's, I think, glorifying sexuality and women's sexuality, women's physicality, in a way that you really just don't get all that often with religious writers in the Judeo-Christian, especially Christian traditions. You tend to get more like people like St. Paul or St. Augustine or people like this, who are really, really uncomfortable with women's physicality and women's sexuality. So that tends to be a very, very strong thread throughout a lot of Christian thought. And I actually, as much as it's almost pornographic in these poems, the fact that Hildegard is glorifying and making divine, again, drawing almost on this Greco-Roman tradition, glorifying and making divine Mary's sexuality, I think is actually really, really important.